Welcome to Killer's Path. I'm your host, Unveiling Legend of Blood, a story series diving into 10 serial killers who escaped justice. Join me to explore this unsolved tale, the first of 10 in our pursuit of the uncaught. Let's start. Hello, I'm Eli Carver, a police inspector with over 2 decades of experience dealing with all kinds of criminals, from petty thieves to cold-blooded killers. I've seen a lot in my career, but nothing haunts me quite like the story of Jack the Ripper. Today, I want to tell you about this case, not as some dry history lesson, but as I see it, through the eyes of an investigator, someone who hunts for truth in the dark. Picture this. It's London, 1888, in the Whitechapel district, a place steeped in poverty, where the stench of cheap gin mixes with the reek of open sewers, and the cobblestone streets glisten under a thick fog. This is where Jack the Ripper, a serial killer, unleashed a reign of terror that remains unsolved to this day. I wasn't there, of course, but through the historical records I've pored over, late nights in my office with a cold cup of coffee, I feel like I could step into that world. I see the narrow alleys, hear the distant clatter of horse hooves, and sense the fear that hung in the air. Jack wasn't just a name, he was a phantom, an unanswered question, and to me, he's a case I wish I could crack with my own hands. Let me start with the victims, women who deserve to be remembered not just as numbers in a file, but as people who lived and struggled in that harsh world. First up is Marianne Nichols. On August 31st, 1888, her body was found in Bucks Row, a cramped little alley I imagine barely wide enough for a cart to pass through. Her throat was slashed deep, almost decapitated. I can picture the cold steel of a blade slicing through flesh without hesitation. Her abdomen was ripped open, her intestines pulled out and draped over her right shoulder like some grotesque trophy. Reading about it sent a chill down my spine. It's not the blood, I've seen plenty of that. It's the deliberate brutality. He didn't just kill her, he wanted the world to see the wreckage he left behind. Next is Annie Chapman on September 8th at the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. I imagine the scene. An early morning, faint light cutting through the fog, and a resident stumbling upon her body, stiff in the London chill. Her throat was cut, just like Nichols, but this time he went further. Her uterus and part of her bladder were removed, placed neatly beside her as if he were displaying his work. To me, this wasn't random. The cuts were too precise, too purposeful. As an inspector, I know a typical killer doesn't do that. He had to have some knowledge of human anatomy, maybe a doctor or someone who'd studied dissection. Then came September 30th, a day I'd call the double event. 2 killings, just hours apart. First was Elizabeth Stride in Dutfield's yard. I picture that alley as tight and dark, with damp brick walls closing in. Her throat was slashed from left to right, but there were no mutilations this time. It makes me wonder, was he interrupted? Did someone walk by and spook him? Or was this someone else entirely? I lean toward the first theory because just a few hours later, he struck again. Catherine Eddowes was killed in Mitre Square, less than a mile away. When I read the report, I could almost smell the blood in the air. Her face was slashed, her nose nearly severed, part of her left ear cut off. Her abdomen was torn open, intestines draped over her right shoulder, her left kidney and part of her uterus taken. To me, this was a man who didn't just want to kill, he wanted to turn his victims into a message. Finally, Mary Jane Kelly on November 9th in Miller's Court. This one hit me the hardest when I read it. She was killed in her own room, a tiny rundown space I imagine reeking of mold and cheap booze. Her body was mutilated beyond anything I'd seen, her face hacked until it was unrecognizable, a nightmare of blood and flesh. Her chest was cut open, her abdomen slashed wide, her heart removed. I think by this point, he'd lost all control. Maybe his madness had taken over completely, and it makes me wonder if this was his final act. I often think about the police back then, the Metropolitan Police, led by Inspector Frederick Aberline. They did their best, I'll give them that. They ramped up patrols, interviewed hundreds of witnesses, examined every body hoping for a clue. But I know they faced obstacles I'm lucky to avoid today. Forensic science was primitive. No fingerprints, no DNA, No surveillance cameras or criminal databases. I've worked cases where a single DNA sample cracked it in days, but with Jack, they were fishing in the dark. I picture Aberline in his office, a flickering oil lamp casting shadows, papers piled high, and a growing sense of helplessness. I get that feeling, when you know the killer's out there, but you can't pin him down. The press didn't help either. From what I've read, they churned out rumors, muddling the investigation. The public panicked, the pressure mounted, and then the letters started coming. The most famous was the Dear Boss letter, sent to the Central News Agency on September 27, 1888. It read, "I'll keep on killing, and next time I'll send you a lady's ear." When I read that, it gave me chills, because it matched the Eddowes killing, where her left ear was partially cut. It was signed Jack the Ripper, and that name became legend. Then there was the Saucy Jack postcard on October 1st, mentioning the double event, Stride and Eddowes. If I got letters like that in one of my cases, I'd have them analyzed for handwriting, fingerprints, even DNA on the paper. But back then, they could only read and guess. A lot of folks think they were hoaxes, maybe from the press or someone craving attention. I lean that way too. They're too theatrical, too perfect to be real. As for suspects, the list is as long as my old case notebook. I've spent nights poring over them, trying to figure out who Jack might have been. First up is Montague John Druitt, a guy who was always near Whitechapel. He killed himself right after the Kelly murder, and his dad was a doctor, so he might have picked up some medical know-how. I think he's a strong contender, but his family denied it, and there's no direct evidence tying him to the scenes. If I were investigating, I'd search his place, look for knives, anything with blood. But back then, they didn't get the chance. Then there's Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish man living in Whitechapel. He was mentally ill, and a witness once identified him near a crime scene. I've dealt with unstable suspects before, and they can be unpredictable. But I wonder if he was sane enough to pull off such intricate killings. If I were Aberline, I'd have put him under 24/7 surveillance, but they probably didn't have the manpower. George Chapman, or Severin Kosowski, caught my eye too. He was a barber near Whitechapel, a job that requires knife skills. Later, he was convicted of poisoning his wives, so he had a killer's streak. But I think if he was Jack, why switch from knives to poison? Killers don't usually change methods that drastically. I'd interrogate him, check his tools, but there's nothing solid to pin him to 1888. Francis Tumblety's another one that intrigues me. He was an American quack doctor who hated women openly and collected uteruses. Sound familiar? I think if I had him in the interrogation room, I'd ask, "What do you do with those uteruses?" But there's no proof he was in Whitechapel during the murders. I'd check train tickets, talk to witnesses, but back then, no one could. Lastly, James Maybrick, with a diary found in 1992 claiming he was Jack. I've read copies of it, full of details about the killings, his feelings as he did them, but it's got too many historical errors and experts call it a fake. I agree. If it landed on my desk, I'd test the ink, the paper, look for DNA, and if it didn't match, I'd toss it out. I keep asking myself, why did Jack stop after Mary Jane Kelly? Did he die? Get arrested for something else? End up in an asylum? I've toyed with the royal theory that Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, was involved. It's a Hollywood idea, a prince killing in the shadows. But there's no solid evidence, and I think it's just gossip to sell papers. The Freemason theory, with weird symbols at the scenes, piqued my interest too. I've investigated gangs with secret signs, but with Jack, there's nothing for him to chase. As an inspector, I'm convinced Jack had medical knowledge. Those cuts were too precise for chance. I picture him as a figure in the fog, knife in hand, moving silently through the alleys. Maybe he was a failed doctor, a shunned anatomist, or just a madman with gifted hands. I've thought, if I were in Whitechapel then, what would I do? I'd set traps, patrol all night, question everyone in the area. But I know, given the times, even I might have failed. The Jack the Ripper case isn't just an old tale in a book. It's changed how we investigate crimes. I see its impact in how we organize police forces today, how we analyze scenes, preserve evidence. Every time I open a new file, I think of Jack. A reminder that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, the killer can slip through your fingers. Over a century later, the question, who was Jack the Ripper, still gnaws at me like an open case in my mind. Here I stand, in my modern world, with all our tech and know-how, but he remains a phantom in the fog, a killer I can't catch, no matter how much I know.
Boots hit gravel, scars run deep. Supernatural's calling, I don't sleep. A gun in hand, a heart of steel. I'm breaking curses, making deals, running through